video. So you've seen drought there, you've seen fire, and if you're intrigued just to know what that's all about, in a minute, Adrian is going to come and teach us a little bit more of what the Bible says about the man that the Bible said was just like us, Elijah. Before he does that, I just want to introduce him. I know we've always got new people in the room here on a Sunday, so you might not know Adrian. He's been leading the church for a few years now. He's a preacher and an evangelist, and he also works, as well as working for the Beacon, he also works for a charity called John 3:16, and he goes off and speaks to people all over the country, telling them about the good news of Jesus. He's got 4 daughters, 2 son-in-laws, and a dog. And we learnt last week that he can make any excuse in the book as to how not to go shopping for clothes. I don't know if he's going to enlighten us a bit more about that this morning. But would you put your hands together to welcome him, please? We're excited to hear what you've got to say to us.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you. I wonder if I could begin this morning with an unusual question, which I'd like to ask, please, if I may, of the women present in the room. I'd like to ask you women, if I may, what springs to mind? What captures your imagination when you hear the phrase, a romantic honeymoon? Well, I can tell you that in April 1998, I took my wife Julia on honeymoon to the scene of this morning's sermon. I took her to the top of Mount Carmel in Israel, the scene of the showdown between the prophets of Baal and Elijah and Yahweh. We wandered around on the top of Mount Carmel, reading the passage that we'll be reading this morning. And then after a while, we went back into the hire car, and I gave Julia some instructions. I said, I'm now going to drive following the route in 1 Kings 18, down from the top of Mount Carmel to the Jezreel Valley. And I asked my new wife, Julia, whether she would do some mathematical calculations as I drove. I asked her to factor in the likely weather conditions, to think about the weight of Ahab's chariot, because as you may know at the end of our story, there was a race between Ahab and his chariot and Elijah who ran, and they raced down from the top of the mountain to the Jezreel Valley. And I tried to recreate, factoring in the different bits of information that I shared with her. I helpfully reminded my new wife that force equals mass times acceleration. And as she sat there trying to do these sums, as I was trying to work out how fast must Elijah have been running, we eventually parked up in the valley of Jezreel. We were on our honeymoon, and I parked up my new wife literally in Armageddon. And she looked at me in the parked car with a blank expression that I've since got used to. With a blank expression. She looked at me vacantly and said out loud, a phrase that I've heard many times since. She looked at me and said, "Oh, my days. What have I married?" Oh, my days. What have I married? But at least we can draw from this episode the fact that this sermon has been 27 years in the making. 27 years of preparation for this morning's talk, starting here. And if you were here last week, then you would have heard us begin to ask this question in our series, which is called Just Like Us, because the book of James says that Elijah was just like us. And we began to ask this question, what can we learn from the life of Elijah? And we only made 2 points last week. So this is our 3rd point. And if you will, in fact, I would like to ask your forgiveness now. Please may you forgive me. Please forgive me because we've got quite a lot of chapters to cover, but we only actually have 2 talks to cover lots of chapters. So I will, please forgive me if I summarize some of chapter 17, and then I promise you when we get to chapter 18, we will open up the text and we will do a proper talk when we get to chapter 18. Okay, so just summarizing, if you don't mind, 1 Kings 17. First thing I think we see is that God's greatest work in you happens when no one is watching. Certainly this was Elijah's experience. After he goes to confront King Ahab, God sends him to the brook Cherith. And there's a drought by this stage. Elijah has said there will be neither rain nor dew in the land. As surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, there will be neither dew nor rain in the land for years until I say so. So now the drought started where in drought season, he's told to go to this brook where he's got some clean drinking water. And God has told him, okay, there won't be any people in the brook Cherith, but if you're wondering about how you'll actually stay alive, don't worry. Some ravens are going to come. And when these birds arrive, they'll have your lunch, like in their beaks. This is the information. I mean, what a day that must have been, don't you think, that first day? Kind of in the morning, he's like not feeling too hungry. By lunchtime, he's thinking, okay, I've got the water to drink. And then the ravens come, like God had said. Wow, what an experience that must have been. And you know, he was all on his own for months. Some of the commentators think it was 6 months. Some of the people think it was 12 months, but it's a long period of time. God's greatest work in you happens when no one is watching. Maybe this is a stage of life you're in right now. Yeah? You're being trained and prepared. You're learning to rely upon God. I mean, it feels like not much is happening. Actually, lots is happening. God is preparing you. So you're getting to learn to trust God for your daily needs. God has said some ravens are going to like flap into the brook, and when they come, apparently they'll have some meat in their beaks, and then it happens. The ravens actually come down, and they kind of wait, and then Elijah takes the meat out of their beaks, and he starts eating. He's still alive. Day one, I'm still here. I'm still alive. There's a drought. People are starving, but Elijah's being provided for by God. Is that what's happening to you? God's preparing you. You're learning to trust God. I mean, maybe not very exhilarating, maybe not too public. You're learning to trust God when no one's watching. Perhaps the greatest missionary of all time learned to trust God in this way. He was a man from Barnsley in Yorkshire called Hudson Taylor. This is the man who God used to break open inland China. Today, there are more than 100 million Bible-believing Christians in China. But in the Victorian era, in the 1850s, there were none. There was absolutely nobody inland in China. There were a few people on the coast, but there was nobody inland until Hudson. Hudson Taylor knew that he'd have to trust God on the mission field. So here's how he trained himself. Here's how God trained him. He was living in Limehouse in East London. He was working at the London Hospital in Whitechapel, and he knew that he'd have to trust God when he got to China. So he noticed that his boss often forgot to pay him, and that was really putting on the pressure in terms of like how would he get to the end of the month. And so he thought, oh, here's an opportunity to learn to trust God. So he said to God, I promise, Lord, I will never remind my boss about my wages. This wasn't something God told him, this is something he told God. I promise, Lord, I'll never, ever remind my boss. And it created this dramatic tension as he had to trust God because his boss kept forgetting to pay him. But he'd pray and pray and pray and never mention it. And this is how he learned to trust God, which of course really came in handy when he was breaking open the whole of inland China for the gospel. So this is a key lesson that God's greatest work in you happens when no one is watching. When no one's watching. You know, Usain Bolt did not become the world's fastest man in a stadium with thousands of people watching. He didn't become the world's fastest man with millions watching on TV. You got to believe he became the world's fastest man when no one was watching him drag weights around in a field in Jamaica. Next thing we see in our story is that Elijah is told in 1 Kings 17 to go north to a place called Zarephath. And Zarephath was not in Israel. It was outside the borders of Israel. It was in Phoenicia. And this may not particularly shock us because, hey, we're used to international travel, no big deal. Oh my goodness, this was controversial at the time. This was even controversial 900 years later when Jesus happened to mention this story in Luke chapter 4, when Jesus was in his hometown at Nazareth. Jesus happened to mention to the people at Nazareth that in 1 Kings 17, Elijah had been called to go north to Zarephath. And at that moment, people were so annoyed and angry that they tried to kill Jesus by pushing him off a cliff. Now, actually, they failed. He walked straight through the crowd. But this was highly controversial that Elijah would be called outside of the kingdom of Israel to Zarephath, which, as you can see, was in Phoenicia, very close to Sidon. Why was this such a big deal at the time? Well, because guess who's queen? Guess who's running the show? This is Jezebel, and she is the daughter of Ethbaal, and Ethbaal is the king of that kingdom of Phoenicia. He's the king of the Sidonians. We know quite a lot about him from outside the Bible. There's a Jewish historian called Josephus who, in his work against Apion, mentions that this is Josephus quoting Menander of Ephesus, and Menander of Ephesus is an ancient historian 200 or 300 years before Christ. He says that Ethbaal had previously been the priest of the Baal cult in the nation. But what he did was he assassinated the king of the Sidonians, who was called Pheles, so that Ethbaal became both priest and king of this Baal cult. He became both priest and king of the nation of the Phoenicians, and now he's got his daughter shipped in, married into Israel. He's got his daughter married to Ahab, and so now he's bossing Phoenicia and he's bossing Israel through his daughter. Jezebel and Ethbaal are on the throne. This is the context into which Elijah is called. This is where Elijah's told to trust God. Go and trust God in Zarephath. Now, he's supposed to be on this mission to show that Yahweh is the God of Israel, but the way he learns to trust Yahweh, that Yahweh is the true God, is by trusting God, trusting Yahweh in Baal country. Can you trust God in Baal's backyard? Hey, you did well over at the brook Cherith, trusting God in Israel. Can you trust God? Can you believe me in Jezebel's backyard? You know, God often prepares you by placing you where you would least expect him to act. You know, this guy Elijah, he's told, this is the next bit of information. So here's the plan, Elijah. Go to Zarephath. When you turn up, obviously there's a drought on, you know, people are dying, people are starving to death. Don't worry, because when you turn up, you'll find a woman at the gate. You'll recognize her because she's going to be gathering sticks. She'll look after you. She'll provide for you in the drought. She'll look after you for the next few years. He turns up, yeah, there really is a woman at the gate, and she really is gathering sticks, just like God said. But it turns out when he talks to her, what she's doing is gathering sticks to make a fire. She's going to make a cake for herself and her son. She's a widow. And then once they've had this cake, they're going to go home and die. That's literally what she says. Why? Because there's a drought. It hasn't rained for a year. There's a famine on. Elijah, I'm going to provide for you through that woman, but the woman's about to drop dead. She's actually preparing her last ever meal. Oh, no, trust me, Elijah. Yeah, but no, trust me. Is that what's happening to you right now? You're trusting God somewhere you didn't think you'd be. You didn't think you'd be in Farnborough. You didn't think you'd be on a job placement in Camberley. But there's a new connection. There's a new mentor. You weren't expecting to be mentored by them. There's a cross-cultural experience. You weren't expecting that, but it's happening. God's training you outside of your comfort zone. Well, I thought I was the prophet too. Yeah, come over here. Trust me in Phoenicia. Is that what's happening to you? You're learning to trust God where you'd least expect him to act. And oh, wow, what an amazing thing it was that first morning. You see, all she's got is a little oil in a jar. This is her final cake before she and her son die. And she's got some flour in the jar. And Elijah is the man of God. And Elijah is living in the promises of God. And even though when she went up to bed the night before, there was definitely no oil in that jug last night when I went up to bed. There was definitely no flour left in the pot. When I went up the stairs last night, there was no food in the house. She comes down the following morning. No way. Like Elijah said, wow, the jug has got oil in it. The jar's got flour. Is this what's happening to you at the moment? God's providing? It's kind of weird. How's this happening? God's doing it. He's providing for you. Elijah's learning to trust God. But this wasn't all. Hey, this went on, by the way, just so you know, for about 2 years. 2 years of miracle bread. 2 years of bread that shouldn't be there. 2 years of oil that shouldn't be there. Flour that's somehow coming out of nowhere. Amazing. But Elijah's still not ready. He's still not ready for the great showdown on Mount Carmel. Baal versus Yahweh. Because what happens next? Check this one out. What happens next is this widow's only son dies. So now Elijah's God's man of power for the hour, the miracle bread man, and the boy's dead. And so Elijah now starts to trust God for a miracle that God has never done before. In the whole history of the Bible up until now, there has never been a resurrection from the dead. No one in the whole history of the Bible up until this point has ever come back from the dead. Elijah's carrying the dead boy up the stairs, believing God for a miracle that God has never done before. Can you imagine it? First, the ravens. Now, the miracle bread. But now, Lord, I'm trusting you for a miracle that I've never seen before, a miracle that you've never done before, but oh God, bring this boy back from the dead. It happens. Miracles in Jezebel's backyard. Trusting God on Jezebel territory. Now, Elijah's brought him back from the dead. The boy's alive. You know, God's normal method of guidance is to only show you the next step. This is the way all the way through the story. And maybe this has been the story of your life. I mean, man alive, we love it when we switch on the sat-nav. Briefly, it shows you a brief glimpse of the whole journey. This is the big picture of how you'll get to where you want to get to in the end. God's sat-nav is not like that. Don't you, any of you found this out? God's sat-nav here's God's sat-nav. Turn left at the next junction. That's it. So where will I be in 5 years' time? What part of turn left at the next junction did you not understand? When you get to the next junction, I'm going to tell you the next step, which could be turn right, but you will never know unless you go 300 yards. That's all you get. This is often God's way. It was certainly God's way of training Elijah. When I was living in Cardiff, I received some really clear guidance. One of the times in my life where I really felt God specifically and clearly guide me in terms of a next step, telling me that I should become part of a church plant. The church plant into a town called Reigate in Surrey. That church plant did not actually exist when God told me to go there. It was a plan. God told me to become part of a church plant that was meeting in a school, this school, which I'm showing you here. There were about 45 people in this church plant, this newly started church when I arrived. And so I turned up. I only knew one person in Reigate. It actually kind of made no sense because my job was in London. I was a journalist in London. I was moving out quite a long way, 25 miles out of London. I was moving out of London to Reigate to become a part of a church plant with 45 people, and I just did not know what the next step was, but I knew God had told me to go there. And so I became part of this tiny church, and it just so happened that we then moved from this school to a different school. We were meeting in a school. The church was, 3 or 4 years old. And 2.5 years later, one Sunday morning, when I was on the welcome team, Julia Brown walked in. And I was in business. She received a thorough welcome. I took an active interest in all sorts of details of her life. And she became fully integrated into our church, I can tell you that much. And so that was God showing me the next step. But, this is all I knew was, okay, so there's a church in a school hall. There's hardly anybody there. And that was it. But hey, this is the way God works. He often just shows you the next step. You see, we have this huge advantage that if you know the Bible, maybe you've been brought up with the Bible. Maybe you actually know the story of Elijah and the battle on Mount Carmel. So actually you know that all that stuff in chapter 17, that's all preparation. That's all just God preparing Elijah to go up Mount Carmel. You know what's going to happen in chapter 18 is this monster competition. Baal versus Yahweh. Ahab versus Elijah. You know that's where it's all going. Whichever of these two gods can call down fire from heaven when they pray, that's the real God. So don't waver between two opinions any longer. Just look at the sky. Whichever God answers by fire, that's the real God. So you know that's what's happening. Elijah didn't know that. All he knew was, go to the brook. There are going to be some birds that will turn up and feed you. Go to the gate of Zarephath. There's going to be a widow gathering sticks. And then the next bit of information that he gets is again pretty brief. After a long time, in the 3rd year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah, go and present yourself to Ahab. Ahab is the king of Israel. He's the bloke who's married Jezebel. He's the bloke who's making Israel a Baal-worshipping country. And his wife, Jezebel, is literally killing off the prophets of Yahweh. But he doesn't know how to do this, so he just sort of leaves where he is. And actually, he can't go to Samaria. As it happens, Ahab's not there. Ahab's gone off to find some grass for his horses. Ahab's worried that his horses are going to starve to death. So Elijah's kind of wandering along, knowing he's supposed to present himself to Ahab, and he bumps into this bloke called Obadiah. And I'm just going to give you a sneak preview of next week and the next chapter. Just by the way, in this conversation with Obadiah tells Elijah something that Elijah just does not want to believe. It's a fact, but it doesn't really fit with how Elijah thinks about himself. And so he just ignores what Obadiah tells him. He kind of disrespects Obadiah and what Obadiah is saying. And this turns out, I'm afraid, to be a flaw in Elijah. Folks, this is what makes Elijah just like us. Because I've got flaws. I don't know about you, but I've got flaws. And it turns out we have a flawed hero. And the flaws will emerge when we revisit this conversation and get into chapter 19 next Sunday. But after this meeting with Obadiah, finally Elijah gets told about what all the preparation was for. He's not even told it was preparation. He's just doing what God says to him. Now he finds out that the whole plan is for a big showdown. A monster competition. This is one of the biggest competitions in the history of the world ever. One of the most famous showdowns in the history of our world. Here is Elijah now explaining the rules of the competition to the king of Israel, King Ahab. Okay, Ahab, here's the plan. Here's the rules of the competition. Get 2 bulls for us. Let Baal's prophets choose one and let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but also not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, I will call on the name of the Lord, and the God who answers by fire, he is God. I mean, quite a straightforward and also a rather dramatic competition. wouldn't you say? And so here is Team Ahab. Here is Team Baal. Here they are. The 450 prophets of Baal have turned up like they were told. There's the sacrifice. They haven't yet cut it into pieces. There's King Ahab. And these guys are going to do their dance. They're going to do their thing. They're going to call on the name of Baal. They're going to ask Baal, who is the storm god, who's the god of lightning and thunder. They're up on top of Mount Carmel. They're just a few miles away from Baal's home territory in Phoenicia. Baal is just a few miles away. Jezebel is nearby. They're ready to go. They're expecting that fire will fall from heaven because Baal is the storm god, the God who commands the lightning. And so they're expecting the sacrifice to be burnt up. And so they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. Baal, answer us, they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered. And they danced around the altar they had made. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. Shout louder, he said. Surely he's a god. Perhaps he's deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. And this is the NIV, New International Version of this passage. But if you read from the ESV, you have a less polite translation of this verse. Because in the ESV, if that's what you're looking at on your phone right now, you will see that actually Elijah's point is, maybe he's relieving himself in the celestial men's room. Your God's on the loo. Maybe he's down the shops. Maybe. So these are the taunts that he's Elijah after this is like the post-lunch session. So all morning the prophets of Baal have been doing their thing, dancing around the altar. Oh, Baal, answer us. You surely are the God of the mountains. You are the great one. You are Baal. And so they call on the name of their God. They're doing their thing. They're doing their dance. They're calling down fire from heaven. Show that you are the God of the mountains. Show that you're the God of Israel. And on it goes. And this just, after a while, becomes quite tiresome. They wait for 9 by about 10:30, people are getting a bit fed up, and it's been going on for ages. We've still got another hour and a half till midday. And so after the whole of the morning session, this is the situation. There is Elijah. And he's taking the mick. I'm not quite sure how to explain that phrase to those of you who are not from the UK. He's taking the mick. Your God's gone down the shops. Maybe your God's gone down the kebab van. Maybe your God is buying a lottery ticket. Maybe your God's down the cinema. Maybe your God is, maybe he's gone to the cinema and his phone's on silent. Elijah is taunting the prophets of Baal. On and on and on it goes. Here's what Elijah says. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened. So they shouted louder and slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed. Maybe they thought that if Baal sees the blood pouring from their wounds, that Baal's kind of passions will be aroused by the sight of the blood flowing. So they've taken off their outer garments now, and they begin cutting themselves and slashing themselves, invoking Baal to do his stuff. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for the evening sacrifice. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. We've been going at it now for hours, all morning. The whole of the post-lunch afternoon session. No fire, nothing happening, nada. Then Elijah said to all the people, this is the whole nation of Israel has been gathered to Mount Carmel. Come here to me, he says. They came to him and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob. With the stones, he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he dug a trench round it. Oh, wow. This is what Jesus was doing when he called his 12 disciples to him. This is what Elijah was doing. You see, these people have become divided. 10 northern tribes had formed a kingdom of Israel. 2 southern tribes had formed the kingdom of Judah. They were supposed to be one nation. These were the 12 tribes of Jacob. These were the 12 sons of Jacob. This was the people of God, yet they've been divided. And now Elijah is reconstituting the nation of Israel, symbolically, prophetically, putting 12 stones, not 10, rebuilding the altar of the Lord that had been broken down. He's rebuilding the altar. And so in the same way, when Jesus comes along 900 years later, he calls 12 disciples to follow him. And people thought that was a bit provocative. Like, who do you think you are? Isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't this Mary's son? What are you calling yourself, a rabbi? Who do you think you are, having 12 disciples? Because Jesus was doing the same thing, reforming Israel, remaking the people of God. And this is what you guys are doing so well at our church. You see, you are rebuilding, remaking, building the altar of the Lord. God won't send his holy fire on a divided people. So your job, my job, is to repair the altar of the Lord. You're building, you guys are doing so brilliantly at this. You are building an altar for the Lord. That's what's happening here. You know, it's 6:45 on a Sunday morning. 6:45 this morning. This is your one day off from work. Your alarm goes off on your one day off. Why? What's your alarm going off at 6:45? Because you're going to be in this room. In this room at 8 o'clock. What are you going to be doing? You're getting down on your hands and knees and laying cables, taping over the cables, putting the mat over the cables so people like me don't trip over. You're bumping stuff in from the storage. You're putting up the staff, all this malarkey. You're building the altar of the Lord. That's what you're doing. How was your weekend? Oh, yeah, it's okay. What'd you get up to? Oh, I went to church. Oh, right, so how was that? Well, yeah, it was good. I was on kids, and so I turned up, and so I prepared the lesson for the kids, and then I taught other people's children, and then I got in the car, and I drove home. That's it? Yeah, that's it. What are you doing? What are you doing? You're building the altar of the Lord. That the fire would fall. This is the purpose of God. This is what's going on. Why are you here practicing your worship? Why are you doing your tech? Why are you out there right now in the corridor teaching the younger teenagers in refuel? You're building the altar of the Lord. This is what God's doing in our country right now. He is repairing the altar of the Lord. This altar had been broken down during the years of Baal worship. It had been broken apart, and now God's man, Elijah, God's prophet, Yahweh's man, is making the altar of the Lord so that the fire would fall. And we're going to see finally, this is our last point this morning, that God's purpose, as we'll see in verse 37, is to turn the hearts of the entire nation back to him. This is a really powerful point because there's quite a long narrative in chapter 18. One of the most exciting stories in the Bible, but you might wonder, what was the point? Was the point like, whoa, fire came from heaven? Is that the point? No. The point's in verse 37. Let's read it. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Then he said to them, fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and on the wood. Do it again, he said. They did it again. Do it a 3rd time, he ordered, and they did it a 3rd time. Why do they do it 3 times? It's to do with the 4 jars, because 3 times 4 is 12. The water ran down around the altar and even filled the trench. At the time of sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, and get ready, this is going to be one of the most famous prayers in the entire Bible. Here we go. Oh Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, O Lord, answer me. Here's the point. So that these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. That's the whole point. That's the whole point. Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." Oh, wow, what a day. What a moment it was when the fire fell upon the sacrifice. And the whole plan and purpose of God was that all these people who lived in this nation, that they might know that Yahweh is Lord. How long will you waver between two opinions? Hey, look, if Baal is God, go ahead and worship him. But if Yahweh is God, worship him. And now they see that Yahweh is God. Because these people watched all morning and all afternoon the frantic prophesying of the prophets of Baal, the slashings, the dances. Nothing happened. This bloke Elijah prays to his God for 60 seconds, says amen, bang, the fire falls. Well, the Lord is obviously God. I mean, it wasn't even close. These guys had like 8 hours, no result. This Elijah guy, his God, 60 seconds, bang, fire falls. The Lord, He is God. And this is God's plan and purpose in our nation. This is God's plan and purpose for the people that live around us. We live in a catchment area of 141,000 people. This is Farnborough plus Camberley plus Yateley. This is our area where we are right now. God's plan and purpose through His church is that these people will know that Yahweh is God, that God's real. That there's actually a real God. Baal is actually not God. Yahweh is God. That's the whole plan of God. That's the purpose. That's why we're doing what we're doing. Hey, why would we mention in a notice in September about the fact that our carol service is the first Sunday in December? Well, because we know that of the 141,000 people that live around us, we already know that hundreds of these people, like the ordinary people, that they would come. They would come here into this room for a carol service. Last year we had about 200 guests who came. This year we've gone to 3 p.m., 5 p.m., and 7 p.m. services. Why? Because we already know that this is the plan and purpose of God. That these people would know that there actually is a real God. That Yahweh is God. God's heart is to turn all the hearts of all the people that live around here back to Him. That's the point. That's the plan. That is the purpose. That is what God is doing. Maybe the band would like to come and join me. You know, if I had been one of these people in the crowd and I see the fire suddenly fall from heaven onto the sacrifice, I reckon I would have thought to myself, gosh, I'm jolly glad that fire didn't fall on me. Don't you think that's what they thought? When the fire, I mean, how awesome it must have been to see fire suddenly fall, bang, and consume a sacrifice. Maybe they thought, oh gosh, I'm so glad that fire didn't fall on me. Because of what I was watching on my phone last night. Because of the way I spoke to my spouse last week. Because of the way I treated my kids or the way I've been acting, some of the things I've been thinking. I'm so glad that that fire didn't fall on me. I'm so glad the fire fell on the sacrifice. And there was a day 900 years later when the judgment of God fell from heaven upon a sacrifice, a sacrificial person, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world. When Christ died on the cross, the judgment, the fire of God's judgment fell upon Jesus so that you could go free, so that I could go free. This is the wonder of God. We're not praying, oh God, send some new fire. No, God has already sent the fire of His judgment, but it fell upon His Son. All these people escaped. Oh, they were able to worship and say, the Lord is God, Yahweh is God. And they could say that because the fire hadn't fallen. They were still alive. That's true of you. You're still here. God's wrath and judgment didn't fall on you. It fell on Jesus. You go free. This is why we sing and celebrate. This is the plan and purpose of God. And at the end of our story, what happens is that the fire has fallen. It's become clear that the Lord is God. And now it's time for the rain to fall. Can you stand with me? Let's stand together. Elijah sends his servant. He knows that after 3.5 years of drought, that the rain's going to come. He knows that Yahweh is God. He knows that God's victory is going to be demonstrated. He sends his servant out time and time again, and eventually his servant comes back and says, I see a cloud on the horizon as small as a man's hand. And Elijah declares, I hear the sound of an abundance of rain. This is what's happening in our country right now. There is a cloud as small as a man's hand. People are coming back to God. People are turning back to God. Churches are being filled up. This church is being filled up. I see a cloud as small as a man's hand. I hear the sound of an abundance of rain. This is not the end of the story. There will be hundreds of people coming to be part of this church. We will be a growing church, transforming lives and building community. God's reign is coming. And so Elijah runs ahead, supernaturally running ahead of the chariot. Ahab's in his chariot doing the best he can. God's man, empowered by God, outruns the king. Because the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. Should we come to Him? Should we worship this great God, the God of Mount Carmel, the God of victory, the God of fire, the God of rain, the God who spared us at the expense of His Son? Let us worship Him. Oh God, we bring ourselves to You. We turn our hearts to worship You. We say, Yahweh, Yahweh is the Lord. Oh, there is a God in Israel. It's not Baal, it's Yahweh. You are the God who answers by fire. You are the God of the rain. Oh God, we worship You. Amen. Amen.
Hey guys, before you go, we just want to say a massive thank you for watching this video today. My name's Chris. I'm part of the leadership team here at the Beacon Church. You know, as a church, we have a big vision. We believe that we exist to help people to know God, to find freedom, to discover their purpose, and to make a difference. If this video has made a difference in your life today, then make sure you check out our other content in our playlist. We believe it's going to really help you out. And don't forget to like and subscribe as you go. Well, that's all from me today. Take care. God bless.